June 1942. The Japanese fleets was supposed to dominate. But something went terribly wrong at Midway. When Admiral Yamamoto got the news, his face went completely white. What he said next shocked every officer in the room. The Americans had just pulled off the impossible. 4 carriers gone in minutes. And the words that came from Tokyo Command? They'd change the entire Pacific War. But here's what nobody talks about: the secret message they tried to hide for decades. The moment of realization. June 4th, 1942. Admiral Nagumo stood on the bridge of his flagship. His 4 aircraft carriers were the pride of Japan. They had crushed Pearl Harbor just 6 months earlier. But now American dive bombers were screaming down from the sky. In less than 5 minutes, 3 of his carriers were on fire. The Akagi, the Kaga, the Soryu, all burning. Black smoke rose thousands of feet into the air. Nagumo watched in complete silence. His officers waited for orders, but he said nothing. He just stared at the flames. One officer later described his face as like a man watching his own funeral. By sunset, all 4 carriers would be gone. The most powerful naval strike force in the world, destroyed in a single day. But what happened next in Tokyo? That's where the real story begins. Because Admiral Yamamoto's reaction would reveal Japan's darkest secret about the war. The message to Yamamoto. Admiral Yamamoto was 300 miles away on the battleship Yamato. He was Japan's greatest naval genius, the man who planned Pearl Harbor, the man who promised victory. At 12:30 p.m., the radio operator handed him a message. Akagi on fire and listing. Yamamoto read it. Then he asked for the message to be confirmed. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe it was a mistake. 20 minutes later, another message arrived. Kaga sinking. Soryu abandoned. Hiryu under attack. Witnesses say Yamamoto's hands started shaking. He walked to his private cabin. He stayed there for 3 hours. No one was allowed inside. Some officers heard him talking to himself through the door. When he finally came out, his face was completely blank. One aide wrote in his diary, "The Admiral looked like a dead man walking." But what did Yamamoto actually say? His first words would shock everyone in that room. Yamamoto's first words. Yamamoto returned to the command center at 4 p.m. Every officer stood at attention. The room was dead silent. They were waiting for orders, waiting for a plan, waiting for their commander to lead them. Yamamoto looked at the map on the table. Then he spoke his first words since hearing the news. Japan has lost the war. The officers were stunned. One captain started to protest, "Admiral, we still have battleships. We still have—" Yamamoto cut him off. "We have lost the strategic initiative. We will never get it back." This wasn't panic. This wasn't emotion. Yamamoto was stating a military fact. He knew something the others didn't understand yet. Japan's entire war plan depended on those 4 carriers. Without them, everything would collapse. But here's the part that's truly chilling. Yamamoto had predicted this exact disaster months before. He had warned Tokyo, and they had ignored him. So what had he said? What warning did Japan's leaders refuse to hear? The warning they ignored. December 1941. Right after Pearl Harbor, Japan was celebrating. Newspapers called it the greatest victory in history. The emperor himself praised the attack. The entire nation believed America would surrender within months. But Yamamoto wasn't celebrating. In a private meeting with the Prime Minister, he said something disturbing. "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I guarantee nothing." 6 months. Yamamoto knew Japan's industrial power couldn't match America's. He knew the carriers were irreplaceable. If Japan lost them, there would be no second chance. The Prime Minister ignored this warning. So did the army generals. They called Yamamoto too cautious, too Western in his thinking. One general even accused him of being defeatist. Now, exactly 6 months later, Yamamoto's prediction had come true. The carriers were gone. Japan's offensive power was destroyed, and the war would turn into exactly what Yamamoto feared most. A long, grinding battle Japan couldn't possibly win. But Tokyo still didn't want to hear the truth. Tokyo's reaction. The news reached Tokyo at 8 p.m. Japanese time. The Imperial Navy headquarters went into chaos. Admirals shouted at each other. Some demanded an immediate counterattack. Others wanted to recall the entire fleet. But the emperor had to be told. This was the delicate part. In Japan's culture, you never gave the emperor bad news directly. You had to soften it, make it sound less catastrophic. The Navy minister went to the palace. He told the emperor that some carriers had been damaged during a tactical engagement. He said the battle was still developing. He avoided the word lost. But the emperor wasn't fooled. He asked a simple question. How many carriers remain operational? Long silence. None, Your Majesty. The emperor's face showed no emotion. He simply nodded. Then he asked his advisors to leave. He wanted to be alone. What he did in that room, no one knows. But Tokyo's next decision would seal Japan's fate. The cover-up begins. Within 24 hours, Tokyo made a stunning choice. They decided to lie. Not to America, to their own people. Japanese newspapers reported Midway as a victory. The headlines read, "Enemy fleet destroyed, 2 American carriers sunk." There were photos of smiling pilots, stories of heroic triumphs, celebrations in the streets. The truth was classified as a state secret. Survivors from the sunken carriers were isolated in special barracks. They couldn't write letters home, couldn't talk to other sailors, couldn't tell anyone what really happened. Officers who knew the truth were sworn to absolute secrecy. Breaking that oath meant imprisonment or worse. One junior officer who told his wife about the losses disappeared. His family never saw him again. Why the cover-up? Because Tokyo Command feared something more than American bombs. They feared their own people losing faith in the war. But the cover-up created an even bigger problem, one that would cost Japan millions of lives. The fatal consequence. Here's what the cover-up did to Japan. By hiding the defeat, Tokyo Command trapped themselves in a lie. They couldn't change strategy. They couldn't prepare defenses. They couldn't tell factories to build more carriers. Because officially, nothing had gone wrong. So for months, Japan kept attacking, kept pushing forward, kept pretending they were winning, all while their naval power was bleeding away. American intelligence
couldn't believe it. They watched Japan make terrible strategic decisions, spreading forces too thin, attacking targets that didn't matter, failing to defend what they'd already captured. One American admiral said, "It's like they don't know they're losing." And he was right. Because most Japanese commanders didn't know. The cover-up had created confusion in their own military. Field officers were making plans based on false information. Meanwhile, Yamamoto knew the truth. And what he did next was perhaps the most tragic part of this story. He kept fighting a war he knew was already lost. The final truth. Yamamoto never spoke publicly about Midway again. He threw himself into planning the next operations, trying to salvage something from the disaster, trying to find a way to make his warning untrue. But privately, he told his closest aide something chilling. Japan is still marching toward the cliff, and no one will stop walking. 1 year later, American fighters shot down Yamamoto's plane. He died knowing his prediction had been correct. Japan had lost the war at Midway. Everything after was just a slow collapse toward inevitable defeat. The cover-up lasted until 1945. When Japan finally surrendered, the public learned the truth about Midway for the first time, 3 years after it happened. 3 years of being told they were winning. So, what did Japanese high command really say when they realized Midway was lost? "We lost the war," but only in whispers. To everyone else, they said, "We're winning." And that lie might have killed more people than the battle itself. The Japanese high command reaction to the Battle of Midway defeat changed everything. Their response? Silence and lies. The Imperial Japanese Navy's report hid the carrier losses from their own people. Japanese admirals knew the strategic consequences immediately. But Tokyo's response to losing the Japanese fleet at Midway was denial. This wasn't just a battle lost. It was the moment Japan's military chose deception over truth. And that choice sealed their fate.